Hi, I'm Kristen. Thanks so much for supporting this podcast and for tuning in despite the title. And if you haven't already done so, it would be great if you could hit the subscribe button and leave a review if you feel like it. I truly appreciate your support and thank you again. Okay, so a trigger warning. As you may have gathered, today's topic will be more disturbing and macabre than usual. So discretion is advised. I debated whether or not to get into the story of the Long Island serial killer since it's a super effed up story and we're dealing with a deranged, diabolical ogre whose astrology is only one piece of this story. Ultimately, as a spooky Scorpio and a Long Island native, actually at the time of the murders I was living in Long Beach, just a couple miles from Gilgo, I've always had this genuine, morbid curiosity around the case, and maybe others do too. We know that astrological signs are expressed in a number of ways, each with a shadow or that negative side. The shadow shows us the, quote, worst of. They're ultimately the lowest vibration of any sign or placement in a chart. And that's really what we're going to be covering here when it comes to Rex Heuermann. He's a Virgo. We'll get into it in a moment. So while you or I or anyone may share similar planets or placements with someone, even a serial killer, it doesn't mean that we're at all the same or even similar. So for instance, someone who's a Taurus sun, a Capricorn moon, and a Libra rising could manifest as Hitler or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So it's a matter of how you use those innate superpowers that are inherent to these astrological signs for good or evil. Also to note, there's not only a spectrum in terms of like good and bad energy, there's a spectrum of magnification and influence. So Mercury retrograde could show up as the Titanic sinking or your text not going through. Macro to micro energy is what we're looking at essentially. In no way would I ever believe or want to suggest that any of this is fated for these women. They were victims of horrific acts committed by a psychopath monster. So we're going to focus solely on the astrology of Rex Heuermann and what's been going on in the sky since the time of his arrest. A TikTok went viral earlier this year from user Lauren Skirvin, listing serial killers and their astrological signs. Skirvin shows us that the majority of serial killers, I'm sorry Virgos, are Virgos. And for reference, Virgos are born between August 22nd and September 23rd. Rex Heuermann was born smack in the middle of Virgo season on September 13th, 1963. Side note, before I get anyone riled up, some of my closest friends and favorite people in the world are Virgos, and I truly love them. Okay, so TikToker Lauren Skirvin points out that serial killers Ed Gein, the inspiration for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Albert DeSalvo, the infamous Boston Strangler, are also Virgos. Virgos are a mutable sign, and mutable signs come at the end of each season. So in this case, summer. And since they help us transition from one season to the next, these signs are seen as like adaptable chameleons and they can take on different personas. But a more generally held stereotype of Virgos is their meticulous attention to detail. Skirvin explains, quote, "You know that their crime scenes are immaculate. They're bleaching those crime scenes within an inch of their lives, and they're perfectionists, so no stone is left unturned." I'll link this TikTok in the show notes so you can watch it for yourself. Other sources claim that Geminis, Pisces, Sagittarius, or Scorpios may lead the charge in terms of criminals, so it really depends on which killers, locations, dates we're talking about. At the end of the day, any sign is capable of embodying the best of their sign's traits or the worst. Let's start with Rex Heuermann's inner planets and some negative stereotypes or traits he appears to embody. Also, as a side note, a talking head on Court TV last night kept calling him Milton from Office Space, and it made me laugh. While we don't have his weirdo's birth time, we could still gather clues based on his birth date and location. And this holds true for anyone who may not know their exact birth time. That happens all the time. We could still totally engage with a chart in a meaningful way. So Rex Heuermann was born on September 13th, 1963, making him a Virgo sun and a Leo moon. Other notable planetary placements that we'll get into are his Venus. His Venus is in Virgo, and to quickly recap, Venus is the way you express your desires. It's how you approach relationships, what you value, who you value, and how you relate to and experience beauty and pleasure. Rex's Mars is in Scorpio, and Mars is your physicality, the way you express passion, anger, assertion, power, and lust. This doesn't go great for him, but we'll get into it. His expressions of these signs are truly in their lowest form. So please do not think I'm suggesting this is normal for any of these planets and signs. It's not. Okay, so starting with the sun in Virgo, Virgos are often known as perfectionists, goal-oriented, exacting, and they can be a little judgmental. Typically, it's because they hold themselves to such a high standard. At best, Virgos are constantly trying to improve and be the best version of themselves. At worst, they behave as though they are better than everyone. It's rare, but it happens. And Virgos are sensitive to their surroundings, and they tend to get embarrassed pretty easily. It's already a stretch for Virgos to sort of show their true selves. So at the first sign of mockery, they can turn that perfectionism inward, and sometimes to a debilitating degree where they'll shut down and then begin to resent everyone around them. Virgos are generally reticent when faced with anything or anyone new. However, once a Virgo is comfortable, they can start talking up a storm. They are, after all, Mercury ruled, Mercury being the messenger god who also rules Gemini, another mutable sign that closes out spring. So some Virgo suns are really uncomfortable in the limelight and typically prefer operating in the background. Solar Virgos can be extremely obsessive, and we can see this in Rex's obsessive and chilling internet searches of the victims' families, their photos, child and violent pornography, and so on. On Monday, July 17th, the New York Times printed a story sort of summarizing what we know at this point about this sadistic killer. In referencing the 32-page bail application that outlines his horrific internet searches, the Times wrote, quote, "The court document also said that Heuermann had done more than 200 internet searches on the investigation of the women he is accused of killing, and that he had, quote, searched for and viewed articles concerning the very task force that was investigating him," end quote. So we've seen him described by those who knew him in a number of different ways. Some said he was a hardworking family man, available anytime he was needed, at least professionally. Others said he was extremely creepy and off-putting, so it seems to depend on which mask he wore and for whom. The Times goes on to write, quote, "One of the interesting things about Heuermann is how differently he struck different people. Some of this seemed to have to do with the differences in how he conducted himself in different social situations. I think a lot of it comes down to the way that people can perceive the same thing differently. But yes, while some neighbors described him as just an average commuter in a suit, others described him as very disturbing. 3 different neighbors told Times reporter Nate Schweber that they had actually joked that he must be a serial killer," end quote. Okay, so not all Virgos are workaholics, but there is that stereotype, and it's something that Rex is said to have been. And unlike Capricorns, who have like a dogged pursuit of success, Virgo's thrill for work typically comes down to details and methodically achieving very measured goals rather than achieving for the big picture. So Virgos want to do things well, whether it's preparing a presentation at work, designing a building, or in this case, staging a grisly scene. There is this sort of odd combination of the intellectual and the practical when it comes to Virgo, and it's sometimes mistaken for aloofness. Virgos are pretty shy, and some will brush off your compliments quickly, but do not let that fool you. Virgos need your respect and appreciation, and if an unevolved Virgo doesn't get it from you, trust that their ill will toward you will increasingly fester. So Virgos are truly most fulfilled when they feel appreciated, valued, and seen for their contributions. And it really stems from them working so hard. And at their best, they're extremely helpful and productive. I've always thought, sort of kept the show on the road, essentially. The negative manifestation seems to be a huge part of Rex Heuermann's psyche, that need to feel recognized and in control, so much so that his depraved desire to play God takes this typically benign trait of wanting to be seen and honored to a disturbing degree. We can see how these qualities of being analytical, intelligent, precise, reserved, and critical exist on a spectrum. We can look at someone like Beyonce, an incredibly evolved Virgo, and see how these traits serve in such a way that she's a prolific superstar. She continues to break barriers and records. She never gives anything less than her absolute best. Rex is obviously the lowest of low humans, and it goes without saying that he uses these traits for evil. And whatever Rex's, quote, best is to him is likely incredibly sadistic. Rex Heuermann has a couple of notable aspects related to his sun and his chart as well. So let's briefly pause and talk a little bit about aspects in astrology, what they are, how they work, and why they're important. So in astrology, aspects are angles that planets form as they move through the sky. Whenever you hear that a planet is squaring or in conjunct, trining, etc., that's an aspect. Some aspects are considered positive, some are considered negative. Either way, an aspect is essentially the shape that the planets are making in the sky at a given time, and if we were to connect the dots, it would essentially create that shape. The idea is that the way that the planets move in the sky influences us Earthlings on some level. And we can see this most obviously as the moon not only affecting the tides, but our moods as well. And we know that these planetary alignments don't cause anything to happen, but their energy seems to influence what's happening. So for instance, we may get a little sentimental or weepy when the moon enters a water sign, or we could feel like a surge of energy when Mars is making a positive aspect. If you're feeling a little unlucky in love, it could be a result of a negative Venus aspect at that time. We'll look for anything we could blame. Back to this idiot. We have his Sun and Venus conjunct, which can manifest beautifully or in its shadowy form. In the case of the Gilgo killer, this aspect seems to take on a most sinister quality. The Sun-Venus conjunction, meaning the Sun and Venus are positioned close to one another in the sky in his chart, can bring like a combustive impulsiveness. This aspect can be that of a really selfish person who uses people for their own advancement, personally or professionally. A Sun-Venus conjunction shows us the ego, and when it takes on a more masculine energy, it can have an extremely, almost obsessive sexual drive. Obviously, in this case, a truly disgusting and perverted one. Sun-Venus conjunction can make someone a, quote, good actor, meaning they can successfully play various characters in their own life. It seems like he was successfully able to convince people he was whoever he pretended to be, and to his advantage. And this placement loves to impress people with their charisma or charm, which is actually a facade for something much darker lurking beneath the surface. The Sun-Venus aspect can also suggest a kind of interesting power dynamic at home, in marriage, whereby the wife or partner has a specific type of authority, even a quiet one. From what we know, we see this in Rex Heuermann allegedly committing these murders while his wife was out of town, suggesting that the presence of his wife and his children, that alone just seemed to keep his sadistic impulses in check. This kind of tension can obviously cause disharmony in a marriage. I can only imagine it was bizarre considering all other factors. We've learned through the New York Post today that his family is, quote, shocked, embarrassed, and disgusted by him. Rightfully so. So Rex Heuermann's sun taking the dominant role in his Sun-Venus conjunction suggests he's ruled completely by his ego, with a sense of self-importance and a need to sort of showcase and be respected for knowledge in his career field. We see this bravado in that weird Bonjour Realty video where the interviewer seems to find Rex's boring answers to be unbelievably funny. I'll link this interview in the show notes in case you're not familiar with it yet. Rex Heuermann in this interview does quite a bit of double speak. It could be interpreted as something much creepier than what it is on the surface. He talks about using a hammer to get what he wants, along with other strange statements. Either way, he wants to come across as an expert, and the interviewer seems happy to facilitate this, perhaps just to get the hell out of there. Who knows? There's nothing positive we could say about this guy. So again, for this episode only, we're going to continue to just stick with the extreme shadow sides of these planets and placements. A Sun-Venus conjunction could result in inauthentic bonds. We kind of see this with his wife and his family, who seemingly had no idea that their husband, father, brother was leading such a disturbing double life. Oddly enough, a more positive expression of this aspect, since Venus is a peacemaking sign, is being open-handed with others, available to help, is tolerant and patient, which, eerily, are the words he uses when describing himself to the Bonjour Realty interviewer. In other words, he's very much aware of how to use his, quote, charms to his benefit. Another interesting aspect in his chart is his Sun conjunct Pluto, meaning his Sun and Pluto are close to one another in the sky in his natal chart. And this aspect suggests sexual vitality and passion, and in this case, seems to materialize as a depraved compulsion. This gives an aggression and almost like fearlessness to his approach in sexual interactions, which seems to track. This aspect thrives on mystery, unraveling and solving mysteries, and in this case, he seemed to be that cat taunting the mouse and enjoying it. Let's move to his moon. Remember, the moon is more to do with emotions and our inner worlds than the outer self. Rex has a moon in Leo, and this can look like a warm, chatty Andy Cohen moon in Leo, or a Rex Heuermann moon in Leo. So again, there's an extreme sliding scale here. So lunar Leos require lots of love, care, and even praise in order to function in the world. It sort of fuels their force in a way, and it's not necessarily a negative thing. And depending on other factors in the chart, moon and Leo people aren't always outgoing, despite the sign's inherent reputation to shine brightly. And this is just a quick reminder that signs, like Leo for instance, can express themselves differently based on the planet they're in. So for instance, a Leo sun is different from a Leo moon. A Leo sun projects outward, and a Leo moon is a reflection of one's interior, meaning their light comes from an emotional source versus an egoic source. When a lunar Leo feels comfortable, they do like being the center of attention. However, they prefer a very small, controlled audience. They can enjoy the spotlight at home or within their circle because they need to know that the audience can validate them without too many variables in the mix. Another lesser spoken of aspect of a lunar Leo is the need to organize, oversee, and even control their family and friends. This is Leo pride at such a low vibration. And we sense his need for control, of course, in his interaction with the women and their families, but also in that weird interview with Bonjour Realty. You can tell by Rex's body language that unless he's in control of the conversation, he's not comfortable. When a lunar Leo feels slighted, they could be dramatic in their emotional response, though this is typically in private. And I'm completely speculating here, but it seems like Melissa Bartholomew may have essentially spit back at him and bruised his ego, leading him to taunt her family with menacing phone calls in the aftermath of her murder. In the A&E series Killing Season, Melissa's stepfather and sister suggest that she had a sharp tongue and would not have gone down without a fight. And this can explain why these calls came to Melissa's family rather than the others. And Rex creepily alludes to this, at least in my opinion, in that same Bonjour Realty interview where he says, when a routine job becomes not routine, that's when I get the call. He is so fucking bone-chillingly creepy, I cannot. When an unevolved Lunar Leo's ego's been hurt, they're given to big scenes and sulking, and we've heard about his victim Amber Costello's ruse that involved her friends barging into her home and pretending to be a jealous boyfriend and running the John, Rex, off. Sadly, but I guess also luckily, this interaction allowed her friend to get a glimpse of his Chevy Avalanche, a clue that ultimately broke the dam, unleashing a barrage of new information. So after Rex was humiliated in front of Amber's friend, Rex allegedly used his burner phone to text Amber something along the lines of, "That was not nice. I hope I get a credit for next time," or something like that, and then planned for a fatal rendezvous the following evening. A low-vibing Lunar Leo will rarely display this embarrassment or humiliation in public, so this had to have rattled him to a disturbing degree. The final moon-related aspect we'll talk about is his moon squaring Mars. They can get super bored by routine and easily frustrated when life feels uncomplicated or too easy. There's a buzz of energy surrounding someone with moon squares Mars, and they may experience and create conflicts in their lives just for the thrill of it. We've heard that Rex Heuermann was antagonistic and even sued 4 different drivers from 2020 to 2023. His reason for causing permanent harm to his body. I don't know what the hell that was about, but it seems like he was strapped for cash, so perhaps he used this as a way to cover his mysterious debts. So clearly this guy is full of shit and seemed to thrive in discomfort. And this way of approaching conflict may come from some traumatic event in childhood, like bullying, but ultimately, who cares? There's literally no excuse for his behavior, even if there is a deep underlying reason behind it. If someone with a moon square Mars placement can pour that excitable energy into sports or some kind of competition, all the better. Something lurks beneath the surface that's bound to get this placement worked up. And what's creepy is that it's not always clear what that something will be. Their bluntness can be both appreciated or considered offensive, depending on their audience and the energy behind their words. They can come off as too eager or self-absorbed and difficult to stomach. Patience, despite Rex's insistence, is definitely not his strong suit, at least authentically. A moon squaring Mars can be quick, unregulated, and often sexually charged. This aspect makes him irascible and easily angered or fired up. Marital, domestic strife is probable. I'm assuming that it was an issue, considering his wife has already filed for divorce. The last planet we'll talk about with regards to Rex Heuermann is his Mars in Scorpio. And as a side note, I don't personally have Mars in Scorpio, but I do have 5 planets in this polarizing sign. So just as with any other zodiac sign, my seeming criticism of it is not. It's truly an interpretation of any given zodiac sign in its lowest form. Mars and Scorpio natives love to challenge themselves to do the impossible. They throw themselves into whatever they decide to do with a concentrated energy and extreme willpower. These people make formidable opponents, although often quietly so. They keep their cool and their equilibrium on the surface, but below the surface may be an entirely different story. Trust me, they are unlikely to let you in. So an unevolved Mars in Scorpio has the potential to exploit others. These people essentially see through others' agendas because they have their own. They rely heavily on their gut feelings. The sexual stamina is thought to be the strongest of all the positions of Mars. Sometimes Mars and Scorpio people are attracted to taboos, and at worst, their fantasies may involve the unspeakable. So they can enjoy scenarios in which the other is giving in to them, desires them completely, will do absolutely anything for them. Their sexual appeal, or in this case, aggression, is strong enough that they generally do get what they want. A Mars in Scorpio's survival instincts are super strong, and they embrace their own animal nature when they're alone with themselves and without guilt. This can obviously be a terrifying prospect when it comes to somebody like Rex Heuermann. So now let's briefly get into what's happening in the sky, beginning with the day of his arrest to now. On July 10th, this is before his arrest, Mars enters Virgo. And this is coming right before Mercury enters Leo on July 17th, making an opposition to, dun dun dun, Pluto. Pluto is associated with the Lord of the Underworld and the sign of Scorpio, and represents our journey into the dark depths of our minds and our souls, unearthing truths and bringing the darkness into the light. This opposition can, and did, give us an opportunity to unearth some kind of data, information, or start conversations that really get to the core of something. This is a time that we may, and we actually did, see headlines where some kind of nefarious truth is exposed, or someone who's been involved in illegal activities for a long time under the guise of a good person turns out to actually not be a good person at all. Because on July 10th, Mars moved into the Mercury-ruled sign of Virgo. It suggests that there's something being uncovered. Virgos are good detectives. And shout out to astrologer Chani Nicholas, who, in speaking just generally of the week's astrology, said, quote, "There can also be a conversation of some kind or something that got skipped or missed." I'm personally thinking of the Chevy Avalanche being the key to unlocking the rest of the clues in the case. She writes, "When planets square the nodes, it's about skipped or missed steps. You come across some information like, whoa, I didn't even see this, and it can make all the difference." Another thing Chani pointed out is that Friday, July 21st, the sun makes an opposition to Pluto. That was present at the new moon as well, but it's really peaking by Friday. This would mean something covert getting exposed, or like a light is being shown on something that's usually underground. I really hope this does not manifest literally, as in additional buried bodies or any more dolls or other creepy shit dwelling in that basement. Based on more horrific details coming to light each day, I think it's safe to say we've just scratched the surface when it comes to Rex Heuermann's dark and deranged movements. So Friday, meaning July 21st, does feel shadowy, and we really need to pay attention to what's being illuminated here. Chani describes it as perhaps seeing the, quote, bones of something. If you're still here, thanks so much for tuning in to this uncharacteristically dark episode. I'm not sure whether or not to expand on this by delving deeper into other crimes, so please reach out. Let me know if this is something you're interested in or if it's just too crazy. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast, again, please subscribe or leave a review. It helps the show grow and reach those who may be into it. As always, reach out if you want to agree, disagree, exchange more ideas about astrology and the headlines. Sometimes it really is eerily spot on. So until next time, thanks.